Okay, we're going to go ahead and get started. We're going to have a wonderful presenter tonight. It's not Dr. Hartman. It's not Dr. Hartman. It is a very experienced horticulturist that actually worked in a nursery while he was a youth at home. He has years and years and years of experience. He's a great speaker. He's a very good mentor to everybody. And everybody in Nueces Master Gardeners loves him, and it is Kevin Gibbs. So tonight, Kevin and I'll be doing the presentation, and then I'm teaching the lab on Saturday. So I'm going to be a little bit guarded on how much I say tonight because I want to save it for the lab because we're going to have fun. We're going to do a hands-on lab on Saturday. Y'all are all going to get dirt, and we're going to work in the dirt together. Kevin?
Renee is too nice. She is extremely knowledgeable, and she says that I'm very knowledgeable, but she's extremely knowledgeable herself. So you get the two best presenters in the world, myself and Renee Brown again. So we're going to go ahead and go through Dr. Hartman. Dr. Hartman is an extension program specialist with Texas A&M AgriLife, and he shared this presentation with us. So we're going to go ahead and work our way through it. It's on plant propagation.
These first few slides are just some examples of some of the research and the propagation they do at A&M. The first one that was there, they're just cutting some of the cuttings, and you'll kind of notice that they're kind of in between a woody and a green cutting. They're using some clean clippers. We have to make sure to clean our tools properly, and they're leaving the nodes on there. So it's very important to cut off the leaves, but leave the nodes. This next slide shows the irrigation, that they've got all those cuttings already. You'll notice that the pots are real white right there. They have a lot of perlite in there. They look like they're almost 100% perlite. A lot of people do propagate with 100% perlite. I think to me the benefit would be it keeps enough air. You can get a little bit of air around the roots and stuff that without stressing them out. You can still get water, and you have less bacteria from the dirt.
So here's some of the reasons why we propagate. Sometimes we're just trying to make new plants, and we're trying to increase what we already have. And some plants are extremely easy to propagate. Others are difficult to propagate. Sometimes we're trying to maintain the genetics of a specific genotype or a cultivar. And I don't know if you guys remember or not, but whenever we asexually propagate, that's basically a clone of the original plant. And so if we propagate asexually, that's maintaining the genetics of the original plant. Sometimes it's to create a genetic variability. That would be sexual propagation. And sometimes it's combining genotypes. How many of you remember back in school, the father of genetics was Gregor Mendel? And he was called that because he crossbred a lot of different pea plants, and that resulted in genetic genotypes. And then sometimes we're virus indexing, and then there's some other purposes for why we might propagate.
We're not going to go through every one of these definitions on here, but I want y'all to know that some of these are on the test. So it's very important. If you can take a screenshot of this, we want y'all to make sure you know what these items are on this slide.
Okay, so anatomy related to propagation. There are four main meristems or growing points on a plant. One is the shoot, which is the vegetative or terminal and auxiliary part of the plant. There is the root tip. There's the reproductive or flowering and fruiting part of the plant. And there's the vascular cambium, which is the secondary or lateral growth. Go ahead, sir. So you can propagate from all of those. Not on every plant. Some plants propagate easily from one part, but not from the other parts. But across the board, there's ability to propagate from many of those different parts.
This stuff will not be on your test, so don't get scared right here. We do know, though, that the rooting hormone and stuff like that is very important. It's also important how you use it and where you use it. Just kind of read through these right here. We're not going to go over every screen on here, but um, what we will learn, especially during our lab, is one of the things is we are creating a wound and we're stressing the plant out. So look at the bottom one. That's the one that mostly a lot of times that I do when I do propagation. Some plants will just propagate just from having water and a little bit of rooting hormone. Others you're going to need to wound. So we're going to learn about wounding it on Saturday.
Okay, so what is the difference between sexual and asexual propagation? Sexual propagation involves combining the male and the female genetic material from two different plants, and when you combine those, you get genetic variation. Asexual propagation means all you're doing is you're making a clone of the original plants and creating a clone that looks just like the original plant. So with sexual propagation, in most plants, that comes from seeds. We probably, I don't know the exact number, but I would say 90% or 95% of plants produce seeds. And so that creates meiosis. If you remember meiosis, that is sexual propagation or the sexual genetic recombination of materials, and it increases genetic diversity. We have learned through science that genetic diversity is actually a good thing. If you think about dogs, it used to be thought that only dogs that were purebred should be allowed. Now we're to the point that we figured out that some of the difficulties that some breeds have is because we have narrowed the genetic genes down too much, and we've isolated these problems that certain breeds have. Now you're seeing these kind of variations in dog breeds, such as the Labradoodle. I won't say what a pit bull and a Shih Tzu are together, but we've got all of these different genetic variations, and we've found that we're doing better by doing that. Another example would be if you go back to the English royal family. At one point, they were only allowed to marry within the royal family, and they isolated their genes to the point that they were having a lot of issues and a lot of problems. And so that now that's why they allow them to marry outside of the royal family. The other way that you can have sexual propagation is through spores. And most of the time we see spores occurring in ferns. I do have a presentation on propagation with spores. If we have time, we might make it to it. So the advantage of sexual propagation is that it's relatively cheap. It doesn't cost that much for you to combine the genetic materials of both the male and the female. It may avoid disease transmission. So by doing that, most of the time there's no transfer of virus or anything like that. It increases the genetic diversity. So we might call it breeding, but most time in plants we use the term hybrid. And it's the ability to make other hybrids. So we actually in farming have a lot of different hybrids that have been created by sexual propagation. Some of the disadvantages are that plants plants are often not true to type, meaning that the offspring don't look like the original parents. And the plants can often have a long juvenile period.
Okay, so guys, this is really important. We did talk about this being on the test. Make sure that you do know what a monocot is and a dicot. And when I was a student, I just sort of memorized this by saying mono 1, di 2. So that kind of gives you a reference on there. It is important to know the breakdown, the seed coat, the endosperm, the embryo, but that part will not be on your test. But we do want you to know, especially about the seed coat. because sometimes when we're propagating seeds, the seed coat is too thick, and we have to scar or kind of like scrape a little bit or break the shell of the seed, um, especially when we're using things like mountain laurel seeds. Mountain laurel seeds, their seed coat is really, really tough. So just kind of keep that in mind about those two things. Okay.
Do you know what the reason for that is, Renee?
What? It has to do with protection, I think, of the seed.
Yes, oftentimes those types of seeds are found in areas that have a limited amount of rainfall each year, and so they have these extremely thick seed coats so that they will sit there and be viable until there's an adequate amount of moisture to make them sprout.
Yeah, and then the mountain laurel seed, they're since we all know they're kind of like a little red seed. Like I had some in my yard, and I think they've been there several years, and they also, animals step on them, so that does crack them and stuff like that. So water needs to enter the seed, and that's one of the reasons that we're going to have to crack the shell. The water activates the enzymes, uh, and metabolism increases. It's also storage, and also we have to have digestion of the starch to sugar. Be kind of thinking about this almost like almost having a little chicken egg. It's kind of similar like that. But some seeds we do have trouble getting the water in there, and we're going to learn on our lab Saturday about some ways to soak seeds, because sometimes it's beneficial if we go ahead and soak them. What do we need for germination? So we need moisture, oxygen, heat, light, darkness, soil depth. So that's why when we're planting our little baby seeds, we don't want to put too much dirt on top of them. One of the things that you will learn as a master gardener when you're getting ready to propagate from seeds, people think a lot of times you need to put that seed tray in the light, like the seed needs sun to germinate. Honestly, the most important thing is heat. And that's why sometimes it's good if you're going to start seeds is to get a little heat mat and use that heat mat underneath there. You don't really need the sun until the little start of the germination. When the little tiny green thing pokes up, you need the sun then. But mainly the sun is producing heat. I think that would be probably the most important thing about germination with seeds.
Okay, so physical and external dormancy. There are some structural inhibitions outside the seed, such as the endocarp or the protective structures. So Renee referred to the fact that some seeds have an extremely thick seed coat. Those can actually inhibit the seed from sprouting or beginning to germinate. There's hard or waxy seed coats. They prevent water from entering the seed, or they can be a physical barrier to germination. They're more common in arid plants. And the word arid means that they're in an area where it gets very limited rainfall. And so the plant sits there, the seed sits there and sits there and sits there until there's an adequate amount of moisture to make it sprout. We've all seen the videos from the desert where there's little to nothing going on, and all of a sudden there's a heavy rainfall in the desert, and suddenly there's tons of plants that are blooming and sprouting all over the place. And then scarification, that's the word. Renee referred to it just a minute ago, that you sometimes have to kind of break the seed coat to allow water to come inside, and that's scarification. And you can do that several ways. There's one that you either kind of rub it with a file or you rub it with some sandpaper to just kind of thin it down where water enters more easily. Or there is actually even a method called acid scarification, where you soak them in acid for a certain amount of time and it eats away at the seed coat to allow moisture to come in.
We didn't talk about this a while ago. I think it was on that other slide and I skipped it. But, sometimes we need to trick the seeds with cold temperatures. And I know that works with acorns and with some of our vegetable gardening seeds. If you take them and put them in an envelope or a little jar or a Ziploc bag, stick them in the refrigerator so they think it's dormant period and they're cold. They think it's winter. And then when you take them out and plant them, they germinate real fast.
I think perennial seeds are more prone to that, Renee.
Yeah.
Whenever you have plants that have to have a certain amount of cold in order for them to germinate, I
Yeah.
think that's where you see that. Other annual plants such as periwinkle and things like zinnias, I don't think they have to have that cold period. So
Yeah. I think it's a good thing to
do you
experiment with, though. But you're right. Yeah. But some do. Okra
do you,
works good under.
okay, so some things that you should consider when you're trying to germinate so that you have success. You need a good germinating media. Most medias need to be very well drained. They should be weed free and disease free. I mean, if you're reusing potting soil, you may be asking for trouble just by using something that could possibly have either weed seeds in it or have some type of pathogen in it. And they need to allow for good aeration. So Renee was talking earlier about perlite. We put perlite into media where we're trying to germinate things because it allows very, very good drainage. Planting depth, we normally plant seeds about 2 times as deep as they are big or wide. So that means a lettuce seed barely gets planted any depth at all, whereas a bean seed gets planted a little bit deeper. Planting temperature depends on the plant type. We just talked about the fact that some plants require a certain amount of cold in order for them to germinate, while others do not. Renee just talked about okra. Okra is a very warm season plant. In fact, down here, it's one of the few vegetables. If you consider it to be a vegetable, it's one of the few vegetables that will produce all the way through the summer. There are generally ideal and ideal minimum temperatures and ideal maximum temperatures for most plants to produce. Tomatoes is a perfect example of that. Most time, if nighttime temperatures get above 80 to 85 degrees, tomatoes begin to shut down. They will continue to grow, but they do not continue to set fruit and produce at that point. And then nutrients, it's necessary at an early stage, and also while it's actively growing. It typically, generally, we say when you can see that a plant is actively growing and putting on new growth, then it's possible that you can go ahead and fertilize it. Until you can see that it's actively growing, this goes for vegetable plants, it goes for trees, it goes for almost everything. You should not be applying fertilizers to it. And then watering, we want to provide adequate moisture, but we do not want to overwater. What happens, Renee, if we overwater plants?
One of the things is it depends on the plant, but one of the things that I see most, especially with things like plumeria, they actually get bacteria in the soil. I know that sounds weird, but they actually get bacteria in the soil, and it'll take over and it'll cause root rot. Plants can, I don't know, it's a little bit hard to describe, but almost can swell too.
Most plants do not like to sit in water. There are some water-loving plants out there, but most plants do not like to sit in water. They like to dry out between watering. So, and then the last thing on that slide was talking about avoiding moisture overnight on seedlings. It's the same way with mature plants. We advise people to water in the morning so that the plants dry out, because if there's excess moisture on a plant overnight, then we have a greater tendency for fungal issues.
I just had somebody ask me today if they could fertilize their seedlings, and I told them no, to wait. They had plumeria seedlings, and they're only about 3 or 4 inches tall, and they were thinking they could help the little plant by fertilizing, and I said, no, not yet, wait.
Yeah, I generally don't recommend it either. Can you talk about the proper way to move seedlings from a container that they have been put in, and to the
Yeah.
point where you can transfer them
Yeah.
or
So
transplant them?
one of the things is it's a good idea to have a very light soil, especially when you're using a little seedling like the one we're looking at right here, or like something like, I'm going to refer to a lot of stuff about plumeria because I have a lot of plumeria and hibiscus. But one of the things is you need to find something to help yourself pick it up, because these little baby seedlings, the little roots are just so tiny and delicate. They're even pale. They hardly have any color to them. They can be as thin as a thread. So a lot of times what I do is I get a popsicle stick or one of those in the medical field, the tongue depressors that they use that are a little bit wider. A little wooden stick like that is perfect for lifting up a little seedling. And this slide right here, the guy has like a little round uh stick, it looks like. But if you had something that was like a popsicle stick that was flat, or a tongue depressor, it would be perfect. Some people find a little spade also that's like a little micro spade. Those are real good to use. But once you have it out of this main container and you're going to put it into your, like, let's say a 4-inch little pot or something like that, make sure not to press down a lot. You just want to take your fingers and make a little hole, put it in there real delicately. Because if you look on the right hand side, see, you can see how delicate those little roots are. And when you put that in the dirt, you want to be very careful, because I've seen people take their hands and just press down after they put a little dirt around there, and you will break off all those roots.
Yeah, I'm glad you said that, Renee, because the main point is you're trying as hard as you can to keep as many of those roots intact as possible. A lot of times when I was working in the nursery, we just pushed our hand underneath the soil of the tray and brought them up that way. So
Yeah, that works. The thing is, I think, is to be very delicate. And
it is.
sometimes, even if you have them in a little pot, especially like when we transplant the roses and stuff like that, we actually use a 2-hand method on the bigger pots and a 1 hand on the smaller, and just kind of turn the pot upside down and sometimes squeeze the top of the pot, because then you can kind of get it in your hand a little better. So you can
Gotcha.
switch. You can go, Tom.
Okay, propagation by spores. Like I said earlier, this generally most of the plants that we see propagation by spores are ferns. It is a form of sexual propagation. It's separate male and female spores fused to form a zygote. We're going back to high school biology now. It needs water and very moist conditions. If you think about where ferns normally grow, they're normally growing in moist conditions. And the plants can take 6 months to 2 years to develop. When they sprout or when they germinate, they're extremely small. There you can see the life cycle of a fern.
This is
There's
just a picture.
Is that a
Yeah,
staghorn?
yeah, it's just a picture of a nice staghorn. We're not exactly sure why he had this one in here, but I will tell you that a staghorn fern can pretty much grow anywheres. They even grow them on a piece of wood at the botanical garden. They don't need a lot of, like, some plants need to be like stuck in soil, and like bromeliads, they don't really need soil. But this is just a big example of a stag fern. Okay, so when we're going to do a sexual propagation, we have several ways to do it. Of course, you guys know we can do cuttings. Sometimes it's a stem. I don't know why it says leaf. Oh, leaf would be a succulent. And then sometimes little roots. It can even be a piece of ginger root. We do have layering. You want to make sure that you can, I don't know, when I'm saying division and separation, I'm thinking about things like my bromeliads. When I cut them apart, I get a butcher knife and I kind of separate them. And I always have to make sure that I have a section of root with that. Grafting and budding is something that I do, and I actually thought that Saturday at the lab I'm actually going to show y'all how to graft. Haven't decided what we're going to graft yet, but I think we will practice doing a graft. Um,
Tissue culture is often done in orchids. That's where I believe it began. Um, and basically, it's taking the tissue and putting into like a petri dish. They put in the culture like agar. Do you guys remember from college biology? You would make these dishes, and they'd have you swab your mouth and do all kinds of stuff, and put it on agar, which is basically a gelatin-based substance. And so they basically um, create tissue from the original plant, and then it turns into a regular plant.
I have never done that. Have you?
No, I have not.
Okay, so we're going to learn Saturday at our lab about removing the vegetation part of the plant. One of the reasons we're doing this, and we'll have some cuttings, and we're going to take most of the leaves off, is because we want all the nutrients and the energy to go to produce new roots. So when we're doing a cutting, and it's almost, I would say, it needs to be probably almost 99.9% of all your cuttings you're going to do. It's going to work like that. You're going to need to take the leaves off. I usually try to leave one leaf at the top, but we want to get, we still need photosynthesis, but we're going to try to get all the energy to go to the root production. Okay, wounding. We're going to learn how to wound this Saturday too. Different cuttings kind of start their roots in different areas, and I'm going to give y'all two examples. A hibiscus cutting will produce roots along the stem. They will get roots from the nodes, but if I have a plumeria cutting, the plumeria cutting doesn't do that. The plumeria cutting will grow the roots from the very, very bottom. Sometimes we have cacti and they'll have air roots, and those air roots just keep coming out all along the plant. So it kind of just depends what kind of plant you're working with, but wounding the plant does help promote root growth. And we're going to practice that a little bit, because it kind of is a skill, because you have to be careful not to scrape too much. And we need to make sure that when we're scraping, remember, we got to keep in mind that Cambrium and the phylum, because that's where we're working in that area. If we're scraping too much, I saw somebody one time take a pocket knife and just rub on a cutting. Well, then the person's cutting didn't root. Well, yeah, because they just about killed it. They, went too deep. Okay. Well, we're not going to go over this whole exact slide right here, because it would be a little bit too boring. But I'm going to tell you about a couple of different kind of rooting hormones, and I'm going to bring a couple of examples on Saturday. Some people like a dry rooting hormone. Some people like a gel, and some people make their own. And I am going to get a recipe. I have a friend who makes her own, and she has it works really well. And she actually brought some the other day to our plant trade. So there is ways to make your own, to not have to buy some of the commercial grade rooting hormones. So it does come in a liquid. I do have some liquid. The liquid is very expensive though to put in your water, but if we were going to use a rooting hormone to do something, and I'll bring both of them for y'all to look at this weekend, the gel is my favorite. And we're going to talk about sanitary conditions of protecting that rooting hormone. And then also, when you're cutting, you want to try to get as many nodes in there as possible. And there is a fine balance between having a cutting that's too green and too woody. It needs to kind of be a little bit in between both spaces. Succulents to me are sometimes the easiest to do because succulents, we just need a little leaf. And a lot of time with succulents, you just wet the soil and lay the little leaf or the little piece on top of it, and you really don't do too much after that. In fact, if you do water a succulent cutting, when it's just a little leaf laying on top of the dirt, a lot of times it'll go ahead and rot. Okay, we need to be very sanitary. And I almost did a mess up today, in fact, in my greenhouse, because I was working on some stuff. And remember we talked about the plumeria that are at the botanical garden that have that virus? I actually have a cutting of one of those plants. And I had cut on it the other day with my clippers, and then I had laid my clippers on my workbench. Well, today I was going to trim one of my zigzag cactuses to propagate for the plant's health. And I picked them up and I almost walked over there and cut on my cactus without cleaning them. And even though we know that virus is in the plumeria, we don't know what it is. So we have to make sure to clean our tools. I didn't have any alcohol out there with me right now, but let me tell you what I cleaned my tools with. I sprayed mosquito spray on it real good. And then I wiped them off because sometimes anything you have laying around will disinfect your tools. But rubbing alcohol mixture is the best. You can also need to keep everything clean. You don't want to take a cutting that's got some mold on it, some mildews, or lay it down in a place that's got some bacteria. You also want to store your stuff. When I store my plumeria for the winter, all I do is stand them in a bucket, and they don't even have dirt in them. But I don't let them be cold, and I don't let them get too hot. I just have to keep them in a dry, moisture control area. Remove all the flowers, the buds, and the fruit because they need that energy. It's kind of like when things are going dormant. They don't need all those. They don't need the flowers. They don't need the leaves. They don't need the fruit. All that stuff needs to be kind of cut off. Okay, so when you're taking a cutting, you want to make sure that you've got a node on there. So look at the picture on the top on the right. See how that little node is on there? The top has a node too, but that they're going to leave on there. But when you're making a cutting, I usually try to have two nodes on there. Just depends on how old the plant is. The nodes will be closer together, but you need at least one node right there. And you're going to scratch above it and below it just a little bit.
So the environmental effects on cuttings, you're basically removing some of the leaves so that you're reducing the respiration. Respiration refers to, respiration and transpiration. You're referring to the exchange of gases, but transpiration is the loss of water in the leaves. And then proper rooting media, like we already said, you want to make sure that you use something that drains very, very well. Because if you keep cuttings too moist, they have a tendency to rot. And then a proper amount of light. You want them to have enough light, but you don't generally want them standing in full sunlight. Here's some examples of some proper rooting environments. And I'm doing the best I can to see these. In the first one, you can see that they have put some kind of bag over them, and that allows moisture to build up. I don't know about you, Renee, but when I use this method, if I can see that there's too much moisture building up in the bag, I remove the bags for a little while and allow some of it to evaporate.
Yeah, I had tried the method where you take a soda bottle and cut it like I don't know, they're like those 3-liter soda bottles, and you put the cutting in the bottom, and then you put the top of the soda bottle back on there, and then you can adjust by taking the lid on and off. I don't know. I don't have good luck with that. It seemed like we always had a little bit of mildew in there. The bottom one looks like it's just cuttings. Yeah, the bottom is cuttings in perlite, and on the bottom on the right-hand side, I don't know, it's showing a misting irrigation. So it's got some misting irrigation going in.
I've actually had pretty good luck with that. When I build a perlite bed, and put the cuttings down in there and use a mist system, I usually have pretty good luck germinating stuff. On the top, you can save those takeout containers that are clear plastic, and a lot of times they work pretty good for propagating things. So,
okay, this next example, it's just a big tray, and it looks like they just took a lot of cuttings and randomly put them in the straight perlite. Earlier I talked about my plumeria. When I put my plumeria in straight perlite, if I put water, I'm trying to get roots on it. If I don't put water, I'm just trying to keep it stored. Now, this looks like in a couple of spots of this perlite tray here that they must have had a little bit too much water in there. You'll also notice that they did not remove all the leaves, but possibly this picture is an example of the seedlings have gotten started and they're growing a little bit. But I don't know, the ones at the top kind of look a little bit. Okay, so here we are propagating some stem cuttings. Let me think. That kind of looks like it could be almost roses, but you'll notice how on this picture, the little soft roots are just coming out everywhere. One of the things you'll notice is sometimes people can just really, there's some plants that all you have to do is stick them in water and they will root like crazy. But then again, you have other things that you have to jump through hoops. You have to put rooting hormone on. You have to wound it, to scar the stem to get the root production in there. But this one right here looks like they did a pretty good job. I would guess this is probably also had perlite because it looks like I see a few pieces up in there. They probably washed it all off. Okay. So when we're selecting our cuttings, we have to kind of decide what kind of plant it is. So on the left, y'all will notice that that plant has more of a soft stem. So a plant that is more in the soft stem, I don't even know how to explain to y'all what I'm trying to say about soft stem. It's a little bit hard. I like to have it in my hand.
those are generally herbaceous plants.
Yeah, that's
Renee.
what I was going to say, the herbaceous plants. But what I was going to say, a lot of times these just need a little bit, they need a little bit more water, more moisture. On the other side, the plant looks like it's more in the woody family. And actually, I probably would not propagate that plant. I would try to get it a little bit more woodier at the bottom, just a little bit more, because it's a little I see one node at the bottom of that plant, but the green one. But I would try to get a little bit darker of a plant with a little bit more wood on there. But you have to kind of experiment. None of us are ever going to be perfect. If I do 100 cuttings of hibiscus, I might only get 75 plants to germinate. So there is going to be always a loss rate. This shows a little bit more wood on there. It's got a little bit more nodes on there, especially not the one he has in his hand, but the other one. See how the other one's a little bit more woodier and it has more nodes on there? That would be a good prospect right there to get started. This is just showing different areas of the hardwood. One thing I will tell you is, and I'm going to try to bring some cuttings of a fig tree. Sometimes some plants, if they're too woody, and you will kind of learn by practicing. And I'm going to try to bring an example of something that's too woody to Saturday so y'all can kind of look at it. And you will feel the difference when you try to scrape to get it to stimulate before you put it in the rooting hormone. This is actually a box that they have some stuff. I want to say it's pine shavings and it's humidity control. They had a fan on it. They moistened it inside there and then they just kept it temperature control and they left it alone. It was one of the projects they were testing. Tom, go to the next slide. Yeah. Oh, it was pine shavings. This is like that stuff you put in your chicken pen. Anyways, what they did is they were experimenting and they just did a wet pine shavings and they laid these cuttings on top and they really didn't do much with them after that. they were testing, but they were keeping that box climate controlled. And you'll see the little roots there. See how they're just kind of spreading out there and budding out. Um, this just kind of gives you an example of how it was splitting at the bottom and then starting to now this I would not put in the dirt yet, but they're just showing you how it started to produce roots at the bottom. Here's it where it has two. This also would be better not to put in the dirt yet. It's not quite ready. You want to have a little bit more roots on there. Now these roots will be a little bit thicker. They won't be so delicate and fine. Here you go. Now this almost looks like a plumeria cutting, because when our plumeria get the little roots at the bottom, they do start at the very bottom. See it on the left there at the very bottom. But I don't know, for some reason they just congregate more at the very bottom of the cutting. But this just shows you some of the little baby roots. This one, I still probably would not put it in the dirt yet. I would just keep it. Now this one could go in the dirt. So this one has a lot of good roots, but you still need to be very, very delicate. You better use your hands. You better have a very, very light soil. And I would have the soil dry on this point because these roots are very delicate. And just put a little dirt in the bottom, put the cutting in there, and then with your hand, just gently put a little bit more dirt around there. Now, you don't want to go too high. I was going to say about to his pinky, right, a little bit higher than his pinky finger would be where you'd want to put the dirt. You don't want to go too much higher than that. This just shows, these are actually fig right here, I think. It looks like fig to me. But this is just some of the trays that shows an example. Now, if you look at that soil, that sure looks like they don't have very much perlite in there. So they must have a very good soil mix, maybe with some dark compost or something in there. And they've got their irrigation. Now, this is probably some of those little cuttings after they got started a little bit. They took them out of the pot so they could go ahead and check the roots. Something like this with roots like this, it could be transplanted at this time. It wouldn't hurt it to do that, but just be very careful. This is a case where you would need to turn the pot upside down in your hand. So between your ring finger and your middle finger, you can kind of just slip it around the stem of that plant, turn it upside down, and then gently remove it. Remove the pot. Have your bigger pot with a little bit of soil on the bottom, and then with two hands, flip it and get it in there, and then just gently press. If you see, this one has just a little bit. This looks like almost a hibiscus right here. But those little baby white roots at the bottom, they will break off. So be very, very careful with that. This first example of this picture right here is where we've got, it's almost like a potha, which, by the way, back in the day, we called them ivies all the time. But then people got away from that and started just calling everything an ivy. This looks like it could be a potha. Yeah, they got away from calling them ivies. They call them pothas. So wherever there was a node there and one leaf, you see that little root coming out of there. So they just cut those little sections. Each one of those can be a new plant. So this is an easy way to propagate. Now the cane at the bottom, and you know what? Tom is on the call. Tom got me some sugar cane one time. And we weren't even sure how to propagate that sugar cane. And this is exactly how we did it. The sugar cane, you have to cut the pieces and then you have to lay it horizontal on the soil. And you didn't really put much soil on top of it. So the sugar cane that I propagated was almost exactly like this. Some of our monsterias can be started like this. Because every one of those little circles will make a new start where that little circle is. Okay, leaves. Sometimes some of our softer plants, I would say that's probably like a kalanchoe right there. You can go ahead and just start those from a leaf. Not everything will start from a leaf. A lot of plants need to make sure we have a node on there. We had last year someone who was very adamant about, they had read an article that they could start a think it was a monstera, and they had a leaf and they had a stem. But at the end of that stem, they did not have a node. And a monstera leaf will not start from that. You've got to have a node. Our softer body leaves, yes, this is more like the stuff like our succulents. You can go ahead and start them like that. It's a good idea to just go ahead and stick them in the dirt or wet the soil first and then just kind of get a little pencil and make a little hole and stick it in there. You can injure them a little bit at the bottom because it's talking about a small piece of leaf cut, blade cut. You know, you can kind of blade cut them a little bit. Sometimes you can cut them in half and they will start. Root cuttings. I will tell you one thing. When I'm thinking about a root cutting, a lot of times I'm thinking of stuff like our cannas, and I'm also thinking of things like ginger root and stuff like that. Ginger is a tuber, anything with a tuber or a root like a piece of ginger, and y'all all know what ginger looks like from the store. That actually can be regrown, that piece you get from the store, as long as they haven't sprayed any kind of hormone retardant on it so it doesn't root. You can go ahead and start a ginger plant from that plant piece that you get at the store. If you buy organic ginger, you can start. But I think of this as our tubers and like our canna plants, because you can just dig up those roots and stick them in the ground.
All right. So layering refers to making a new plant by bending an existing stem down to the ground. Some things I can think of that do this are like berries.
Fig trees too.
Fig tree. Oh, okay. I know blackberries do this where they touch the ground. Sometimes they form roots and you're able to just cut them off and you have a new plant. There is also air layering. And that's done by removing a portion of the stem and usually stuff sphagnum moss into that area and cover it with a piece of plastic or a baggie until it forms roots, and then you're able to separate that from the original plant and you have a brand new plant from that. Okay, you generally use it for plants that may be difficult to just do to root from a cutting. I've seen corn plants rooted this way, Dieffenbachias, and some other plants that have been rooted this way that maybe you can't just take a general cutting off of them and root them that way. And rooting occurs where the plant is exposed to the moist medium, and the success rate is pretty great, but it can be labor intensive. Go ahead, Renee.
Okay, so I live on a farm and my dad has passed away, but my dad had a giant fig tree here at the farm. And everybody always wanted his cuttings from his fig tree. And this is exactly what he did right here. So where it says simple, we're going to kind of go over that because that's the method my dad used. So what my dad did is a fig tree is big sometimes, and his was huge. And he would take a limb that was kind of towards the bottom. And see where the little red hook is? My dad would take his pocket knife and scrape and cut a little section underneath there because he was wounding it. He would pull that piece of that limb down. He would make a little bit of a hole, put that limb piece in the dirt and let part of it stick up, just like this picture. Then he would put dirt back on top of it. Then he would put a brick. So the brick, instead of this little hook thing they're showing on here, my dad would use a brick. And the brick would hold that limb down. And eventually, he would see the green leaves coming up. And, he waited a long time. And then he would cut it. So you would cut it right where that hump is that comes from the mother plant. And then you could just kind of trim it back. But that worked real good, especially if you don't have a lot of time. Like Kevin said, sometimes when we take our fig cuttings and we're putting them in water or dirt or soil and we're trying to root them, they don't always work. So there's a very high success rate if you're leaving it on the mother plant. The picture at the bottom where it says mounding, that picture also would work. So what you can see, at first I kind of was thinking like, what in the world is that? But what they did is they just took that soil and they put it really high around that plant. Now, I would be careful doing this with some plants because you're going to have a certain amount of rot. You could rot your mother plant. At the top where it says compounding, that would work really good with berries. Um, in fact, I just received some dewberries and I can, oh, you know what? I'll bring a piece maybe. It does have roots all along the long piece. Like there's about a 3-inch piece of dewberry cutting and it has roots all along it. And those roots were laid down and they were just naturally growing. This is just an example of a really thick plant. It looks like they're just kind of underneath there with their hands. They're gently separating some of the plants out of there. This is just an example of that mound rooting. I would be very cautious with this. It just kind of makes me feel like my plants would rot. Air layering. I actually have some of these and I think I'm going to bring them to the lab. And if y'all would like to try it, I will give y'all some. It works really good for hibiscus and it works pretty good for some fruit trees. So basically what you're doing, and y'all can all see this, so we don't need to go over all the details and read it, but you're wounding the plant. You're putting some moss, or some people put a little bit of soil around there, and then you're closing it up. You're sealing it. They've used some plastic here, and you have to have a little bit of moisture in there, of course, but you want to seal it really, really, really good. And then what's kind of nice about having the clear plastic is you can actually see the roots. The little air layering containers that I have were given to me by a friend, and they are actually black plastic, like hard plastic. But they work real well and they hold up to the weather. The only thing is you have to kind of either be patient and not peek, or if you peek, you got to be real careful. Okay, orchids. Kevin, do you want to talk about orchids? Air layering.
I don't know anything about air layering orchids. I'm assuming that that bloom stem, after it's done blooming, if it bends down towards the soil, it has a chance of producing a new plant.
Yeah, and that's what we'll do. I think we should let Nick be the researcher on this and report back to us on Saturday. He might
Sounds
know
good.
he might know where there's an orchid greenhouse somewhere. You know, he might be able to see it. But yeah,
Uh-huh.
that's what it's doing. It's Nick said he's on it. Okay, Nick, that's your little job. You need to get a hey, bring an example, Nick. That would be great. I know I have an orchid here that I've had a couple of years and it's just in my bathroom window. I don't do a lot to it, but I did notice one day it had an air root, but it was coming from the bottom. But this one right here, like Kevin said, is bending over and it's going to touch the soil and produce a new plant. So at some point, you can go ahead and cut it and you'll have to cut that stem kind of like where that little green twisty thing is. And then you'll have two plants. This looks like we've got just a plain old spider plant on the left with those two hanging pots. And y'all know if you've seen a little spider plant at the nursery, all those little things at the bottom are the little babies. You can actually just cut those off and cut that cream colored stem off that it's hanging from. And each one of those little babies already has a little bit of roots on them. And you can put those little baby spider plants in the soil and they do very, very well.
Renee,
Yeah.
I had an airplane plant on my patio, and I had some fun noodles. And the next thing I knew, the airplane plant had already rooted into one of the fun noodles.
Oh my gosh. They root very, very easy. Only, and like you're saying, accidents happen and sometimes it's the best. On the top on the right hand, I don't know if it's y'all's right hand or left hand side, but on the other side on the top, you see how that plant has runners? That's really beneficial.
Those are
Strawberries.
strawberries.
Yeah, it looked like a
Yep.
strawberry to me. I want y'all to note that this is very beneficial when we have plants that we love, but it is not beneficial than when we have a weed like nut sedge or something like that, because it just, and even grass weeds in our lawns, they'll just keep a running and running. I don't know what the one is at the bottom. Is it I can't see it. What is that, Kevin, at the bottom in that clay pot?
I cannot tell. I've zoomed in.
Okay, we're
It
just
looks
gonna
like
skip it.
it looks like some kind of airplane plant.
It kind of does. We're gonna skip that.
I didn't want to interrupt y'all. You had it going pretty good, but one of those early slides when you were talking about using a tongue depressor to raise those little seedlings out of the tray.
Yeah.
Another
Yeah.
thing he's illustrating is that he only picked it up by a leaf. He did
Yeah.
not use his fingers on the stem because those stems are so fragile, touching them will crush them. So he
Yeah.
lifted it from the bottom, but his finger was on the leaf, not the stem.
That's correct. Thank you for bringing that to our attention.
Yes,
I forgot to mention that.
That's
That's why we have you.
That's what I'm here for.
Okay, so we know when we propagate, we were talking about this earlier, we can use rhizomes. So a lot of times when you're going to have irises, bamboo, the gingers, like I was talking about the cannas that we have in our yards. Basically, the rhizome is that thick rooty part. If you look at the top picture on the right-hand side, it's not those little roots, it's that big, thick root. And so when you hear somebody talk about rhizomes, that's what they're talking about. And all those sections can make new plants. And a lot of times the easiest thing to do is just get a shovel or a sharpshooter shovel and just kind of go down around where you see some green at the top. And you can trim off a lot of that green at the top. It usually dies back anyways. But the pieces that have the little baby roots on them, those kind of do a little bit better most of the time. The pieces that don't have any of the little baby roots on there are a little bit harder to get started. But they're little baby pups. You can also do that with your banana trees, your bromeliads. Ruby dug up a bunch of bromeliads at her house the other day, and she just kind of pulled them up, had a shovel and dug them up, and they all had a little bit of root on them. And she is going to be donating them for the plant sale. But just make sure you try to get at least a little bit of root on there. Banana trees, they're pretty hardy. You could just get some of those little pups with a shovel around there. They don't have to have much root on them for some reason. The other way to propagate is division. A lot of times you're just kind of pulling the plant apart. A lot of times if it's a fern, an ornamental grass, or something like even I was going to say some of our ivies that we have that are more like the I've got one called Three Kings. It's a arrowhead. You can go ahead and just kind of get a butcher knife and just kind of cut those things apart, because as long as you're getting a little bit of root on each area, you can kind of get them in there. If you're going to pull them apart by hand, be very gentle, use a water hose, kind of wiggle them apart, don't just jerk them apart. This is just kind of an example. This looks like they just took some pieces and actually just put them down in water, and they rooted like crazy. The funny thing is as we learn as master gardeners and we kind of experiment with stuff and see the runners and the little roots come up off the node areas, there'll be times when you're going to take a lot of care to start something and you're going to lose that plant. There may be another time where you're just too busy and you just take a bunch of cuttings and stick them in a jar with water and don't pay any attention to them at all, and they'll just root like crazy. So it's just kind of trial and error, and we just have to learn. This kind of looks like it could be some cane. But you see how they went ahead and cut the top off there? They've got some roots. They're just going to transplant these. You think that's cane? It looks like cane to me. But as long as
it looks like tea plant to me.
Oh yeah, I see that now that I see a little bit more red on there. It's could either be tea plant or some sort of cane.
So bulbs can either be scaly, meaning that they have a non-truncate bulb, or they can be truncate, meaning
one of them gets roots at the bottom, and one of them, the little rooty thing, will come to the plant to the top. That's about all I remember on those. And I remember that you have to also start it, like make sure that you have the proper end down, and we didn't cover very much of this when Molly taught a class on this one time, and she just kind of skipped over it a little bit too. You can
There's a
kind of,
pineapple.
yeah, and that on the bottom, it looks like it's one of those things called Mother of 1,000 that all them little babies pop up on there. Budding and grafting. Okay. You got to remember there's certain reasons why we graft plants. Sometimes we graft things for aesthetics. Sometimes we graft them because we're trying to produce a better root stock on a plant. So basically what you're doing is, and I'm going to give you an example with citrus. With a citrus plant, we may have a plant that the fruit is very desirable. And then we may have another one where the fruit is very sour, but it's a tough plant. So the roots are producing good. It's tough. It doesn't die back so bad on a freeze. And it's got a good root stock. So what we're going to do then is we're going to take the desirable tasting plant, the top of it, we're going to graft it onto the bottom of the root stock. And even with roses, they do this. And that's why there's actually a rose at the Botanical Garden. I don't know if they pulled it out yet, but there was a rose at the Botanical Garden. The roses on the top of the plant were white, and at the very bottom, there was a couple of red roses. So the red ones were coming from below the graft. It had started to sprout below the graft, and it was from a tough old rose that happened to be red, but they had grafted a white rose on top because it was more delicate. So grafting basically is we're joining two pieces together. I always kind of feel like the cuts need to be really close to take, and you need to wrap it tightly. There is some special tape to wrap them with. Saran wrap also works. Some plants, if the trunk is a little bit softer, you can take some, I'm going to say wig pins, but y'all aren't going to know what that is. It's kind of a mounting pin that has a T on the end. You can actually pierce through the plant to hold the two pieces together, and then use some of the grafting tape or saran wrap. The best thing to do when you're trying to do this kind of grafting is not look at it. When you look at it, you are having taking the chance that you're going to dislodge it. And even a slight movement, even sometimes the wind being too harsh, will stop the grafting process on there. Sometimes people also graft things like if you had a hibiscus and you wanted to make half the tree pink and half of it yellow, you could graft a different color flower on the other side. They do that with plumeria. They'll have a big plumeria tree and they'll graft maybe 3 or 4 different colors on there. So that's the reasons to graft mostly, is either we're trying to get a more desirable, tougher, stronger plant, especially like with the fruit trees, and we're using a root stock that's tough. Okay, the reasons we're going to propagate. So we know one reason is, Kevin talked about this earlier, is we're going to have a clone. We also want to try to produce, like I said, desirable fruit off of a tough rootstock. It also helps reduce the juvenile period. And let me tell you what that one is. You know, if you start an avocado tree from a seed, when you eat your avocado, that thing you can grow it, sure, but you may not get fruit off that thing for 7+ years. But the avocado trees we buy at the store, they have grafted them. So at the nursery. So let's say you go to one of the nurseries in town and you buy an avocado tree. That juvenile period has already been done in the greenhouse. And a lot of time those avocado trees are already at least 3 years old when you are buying it at the nursery. So that's why you'll hear people say, oh no, I got avocados off my tree in 3 years, 4 years. But that's why they have taken a hardy rootstock of maybe a different type of avocado, and they have rooted some juvenile pieces on the top of it. So you're going to get production a little bit faster. I don't know why it says repair damage to the plant. I can't even think why it would be there. Okay, this is a graft. This is an ugly graft, but this graph right here is probably one of my favorite ways to do it because the weight of gravity is going to keep it in that V. So you see the bottom piece had a V. The top piece was cut to fit in there. Looks like that bottom piece might have been a little bit thicker though, and it calloused all around there. So this is a successful graft. But this method right here, by having the V, think about it for a minute. Gravity's going to keep pushing it down in there. If you do you don't want to do a flush cut, a flat cut. Now with desert rose, you can do a flat cut. It works pretty good. You probably could do one with a plumeria if it was a small plant, but I wouldn't recommend it. But this V cut right here is the easiest way to graft. Okay, so right here we've got some different methods. We're not going to necessarily go over every one of them, but you can do a little slit in the bark and put a little piece inside there. I have never done this method right here. I have done the chip method with a desert rose, and it worked really good, and I had good success, and I was able to put 2 different colors on a desert rose by taking a knife and making that little piece. Got to be real careful what you're doing though, because you don't want to cut too much and then have it like break off and stuff like that. Nick has a comment, but I'm going to read it in a second. Patch budding, I have never also done that. It kind of would probably do better with, like you're saying, pecan and walnut trees. But usually with pecan trees, we can grow them from pecans, and walnut trees, we just don't grow enough here in our area. Let's see what Nick says. When grafting is the upper portion dies, will it maintain the plant? It might, Nick. Nick's asking a question. And I'll give you an example, and I know I keep talking about plumeria, but that's where I have most grafting experience. With plumeria, you could see a little bit of dieback in the top plant. If you do, though, you better watch it real carefully because it could die. But it should, if you've got that grafting tape really, really tight, and you've got it stable, you should not see very much die off. Now, I would remove all the leaves, except maybe keep one on top. Same thing works for roses. But I don't know. If you start seeing dieback, you're probably losing your graft. And I did have one that somebody, go ahead.
May I address this, Renee?
Yeah.
Okay, generally speaking, if the scion dies, all you're going to get is the characteristics of the rootstock.
Yeah.
An example of that was during the freeze, we had a lot of citrus that people said, oh, my citrus survived. But they actually only survived, only the rootstock survived. The portion, the scion above the graft did not survive, and it froze back beyond the graft, and all you got was the rootstock. And generally in citrus, what we think of that we have left is just sour orange.
Yeah. And mine did that. And but I had a lime tree, and it did come back below the graft, but I left it because it was a lime anyways. So it was already going to be sour. It didn't, bother me, but I sure wouldn't do it with anything else like an orange. But with a soft plant like a desert rose or a plumeria or even a rose bush, if you're grafting it, if you start seeing dying, you're probably losing your graft, and it will come back. And that's what happened to that rose at the botanical garden. At one point, the white rose at the top did die back, and so it just somehow started growing from the red rootstock at the bottom. Everybody thought it was kind of cool that it was doing that, but anyways. Okay, so when we're selecting, I want y'all to see where the clippers are, and this is a little bit hard sometimes, but this piece they're selecting is right in between, right where it's woody and where it's green. I probably would have cut one more down where you see that little leaf coming out right below the hand, but everybody has to make their own choices of where they want to cut. But you don't want it too woody, and you don't want it too green. Go ahead. It's kind of takes practice. So right here, they're removing all the leaves. You can go ahead and flip through them, Tom. I think they'll go pretty fast. You've got they do have a little bit of wood on there. See how at the bottom it's brown on the left-hand side? They're going to go ahead and they've got help. Okay, here is the example of the grafting tape, and I do have some I'll bring. So if y'all want to experiment on Saturday at the lab. Now, this person is going to do a split graft. So they've got a very fine little knife. An X-Acto knife works real good, but there is grafting knives. But you got to be very careful because you're going to cut your finger off here. So they're going to split it open. And they're going to do, they're cutting the bud stick. See, he's got a little toolbox there. They've removed a little piece. This is a different way to graft. They've just left a little bit. They're going to insert that little piece, and this is an example of one of the, I think, they're stretching it and they're wrapping it around there real tight, and they're not going to cover up that node. Did you see that they left that in there? So they did a little slip in there. They put that little piece in there. They wrapped it real tight, but they left that node sticking out. The cliff graft is, a lot of this right here is with hardwoods, more like trees and pecans and things like that are older. But I just don't think the first picture with the cliff graft, I just don't think aesthetically, once that thing takes, it will take pretty easy because they're slipping it down in there. But aesthetically, I just don't think it's very appealing to have it like that. The bark graft, we usually don't do grafting around here too much with pecan trees. I'm sure there's people that do, but you do have to be real careful with that because the bark can fall off. The cutting of the whip and tongue groove, this will work for a lot of plants. And here again, you notice gravity is going to keep that piece down in there. And a lot of the nurseries use that, like it says, with young trees. But pay attention to kind of what I'm trying to tell y'all. If they'd have made that as a smooth 45-degree angle cut, that thing would slip off itself. But by making that little notch on there, it's going to keep it tight in place. This is just an example of where you can see where the red is. They have grafted this citrus tree. Probably, I'm not sure why. They might be experimenting with stuff. A lot of stuff is grafted at the bottom. They might be testing stuff right here. This is just a Thai plant. We saw a lot of these a while ago. On this one, it looks like they put 2 of them on there. It also looks like they might have taken a different type of plant and put it on there. I had somebody ask me one time, this is crazy, but what do y'all think? Somebody asked me if they could graft a peach tree onto a weesach bush. So weesach is a weed, and it's a tree in pastures. And what I tried to explain to the gentleman is he wanted to experiment. It needs to be it needs to be in the same family. You can't just take a pecan limb and graft it onto a citrus tree. They need to be in the same family of plants. This is just an example of they've stuck that graft down in there. But again, here, this just doesn't look very aesthetically pleasing. Yeah, it'll work. It's got a tight fit in there, but once it grafts over, you're still going to have that ugly little knob there. My concern also would be that ugly limb at the bottom probably would collect water in that area eventually and probably rot out. This is just an example of a pecan tree. Monty Nesbitt. Look, it's his slide. Okay.
Okay. So when we're talking about tissue culture, it's a very highly controlled environment, normally in a laboratory. I don't know of any tissue culture that's done outside the laboratory. It requires very sterile conditions. And the reason for that is that you have to make sure that you have no fungal infections, no virus infections, or anything else like that. It generally contains a growth media that contains vital nutrients. And like I said earlier, that's normally agar. And it can be asexual or sexual, but it's normally as well, it's normally sexual as far as I know, and it can be difficult without the proper equipment. And I know tissue culture most commonly used in the propagation of orchids. So
David had a question or a comment. David said,
okay,
and it kind of went back to that other graph on the other page. He said, I thought the diameter had to be about the same. Traditionally, it is a good idea to have it the same. It's not always going to work out like that. Some people don't care, but aesthetically, to be pleasant to look at, and to me, I would say that, like I said, water would collect on the top of there. I would avoid that kind of graft. But yes,
I agree with that. But I have seen them do tea budding and stuff where the rootstock and the sign are nowhere close to the same size. So
okay. So I am actually going to bring a hydroponics setup to the lab on Saturday. I have one that's somebody built homemade. So the benefits of hydroponic are that you don't have to use soil. The roots are exposed to the water, which has you can apply fertilizer in there. They can get the nutrients and stuff like that. A lot of people like it because if you had the little one on the left with the light on top, that's like a little countertop unit. That's really good for growing herbs. And a lot of people like that kind of thing. The setup I have is like the one with the white tub. I actually have grown lettuce. Last year I had leaf lettuce in my greenhouse in a hydroponic setup the whole winter. I just cut the leaf lettuce off the top. I always made sure to leave at least one leaf and a little bit of roots. It worked very nice. I did use rainwater. We did I actually had rainwater last year. And when I needed to add some nutrients or a little Epsom salt or something like that, I just lifted the lid a little bit and put a little bit of nutrients in there. Liquid fertilizer works really good. The only thing is, I will say, is not to keep any of your holes open because you will get bugs in there or little frogs or something. They'll die inside there. But hydroponics, you can build really easy for yourself. Some people do it with PVC pipe. They have a system with maybe a fish pond where the water recycles back through the fish, runs back down into the fish tank, and then it runs back to the PVC. So there's a lot of different setups like that. I think Nick said he had a hydroponic system too, or he had built one. But mine's in a tub from Lowe's. Actually, a friend built it for me, and I did some of the work on it, but I didn't do all of the work on it. Okay, so hydroponic gardening. It doesn't require soil. The water is rich in nutrients. It's really good for propagating indoors. You have environmental control, and you have good plant production. You know, something else you can do that I had done this also. I put an aquarium heater in mine one time when it got really cold, and I felt like I just didn't know if the water would stay warm enough. I took a little bitty aquarium heater and just stuck it down there in my water, and it seemed to help quite a bit. Okay. Some people really like this system because they're not having to mess with soil. Some people like it because you can use kind of DIY stuff at home. You can use old aquarium pumps. You can use trays, beds, pipes, PVC pipe, like I said. You can use, sometimes people just put sand or stones in there. Some people put nothing but the water. So it just kind of depends on what you want to do. I would suggest if you want to try a system like this, do DIY. Just look for stuff around your house. Go to a garage sale and get an old aquarium pump from somebody. You know, you just need a little bit of stuff. I would say that if the fancier you get, you're investing, you're getting a little bit of money in there. But don't do it if you're not going to do it long term. My equipment, some of it came from Amazon, some of it came from a garage sale. I would say the biggest thing about hydroponics is, like we're saying, the energy is not spent by, I don't know how, let me see. Using energy is spent sifting through the soil to find your nutrients, but the plant, if it's only in the water, it can just kind of like suck it up real quick. So it seems like it absorbs the nutrients a little bit better. Okay, so you can have chambers or trays to hold your plants. You can have reservoirs, submergible pumps. Just an aquarium pump will do good. You can have drip emitters or sprayers. Mine sprays in the system that I have. I also have a aerator inside mine. Some people use their grow lights. Mine was just in a greenhouse. Kevin, did you want to show some videos off that other one, or is that?
No, I think we're good, Renee. I think you've done an excellent job explaining things. Dr. Hartman's PowerPoint is very thorough, so